Hi, hello, I'm Sam Harrison. I read, review, and discuss fantasy and science fiction books. Today, we have a discussion on the big controversy on book Twitter from last month, because timeliness is not one of my strong suits. Prologue skipping. So, it came to my attention last month because of my buddy Joe Byrne, who writes the Hybrid Helix books, which I'm actually reading the latest book at the moment and really enjoy it. Not the latest, the third book in the series. My latest, the book in the series of the Hybrid Helix, which is called Blood Reunion. Reading that right now and having a great time. Joe was talking on Twitter about how he's found out that there are a huge group of people who read fantasy and sci-fi books who do not read the prologue. And this blew my mind. So if you're a prologue skipper, I've got 7 reasons for why you should stop and you should start reading those prologues. So, number 1, reading my notes here. Prologues almost always, especially in fantasy and sci-fi, have essential world building. So, let's talk about essential world building and prologues. If you skip the prologue in, let's say, for example, Brandon Sanderson's Stormlight Archive, the prologues in those books is so important and will give you it kind of the prologue for book 1 introduces the Knight's Radiant abilities. It introduces the society, the Alethi society, introduces you to Gavilar, introduces you to Zeth. Imagine, like, if you skip that, which is the inciting incident for the entire story, and then you're reading, the rest of the book really hinges on that inciting incident in the prologue. And the prologue is so important that Brandon Sanderson gives us a new point of view on that same prologue in every single book. So, like, the Stormlight Archive is one of the best prologues, and it's one of the best because we get to see it from all these different angles in each book. But honestly, I feel like you can't, if you skip that prologue, you miss so much context for the wider story and for who these characters are and why they are the way they are. So, character intros is reason number 2. So, I talked about a second ago that first prologue in Stormlight Archive introduces you to Zeth, introduces you to Gavilar, and how important they are. But let's also go into some other prologues. Like, let's talk about... so, I just finished reading The Dragon Reborn, which is the third Wheel of Time book. And all 3 Wheel of Time books have a prologue that I've read. I assume they all do, but the 3 that I've read have a prologue. And all 3 of those introduce really important characters. So we're introduced to the to Lewis Theron Telemon in or Lewis Theron. I think Lewis Theron. It's been a while since I read Either World. So we're introduced to Lewis Theron in the Either Worlds prologue, who is the previous dragon, and the events of him going mad and raising Dragonmount and killing his entire family are massively important for the context that gives us on male channeling, and why Rand in particular is afraid to be a male channeler, is afraid to be the Dragon Reborn. And that story, that prologue is still reverberating into where we are now in book 3. And I'm sure throughout the whole series. I'm drinking a lot of coffee today, sorry. So we also get introduced to, if you think about, there are some books that I would say essentially have a prologue, but just call it chapter 1. And so that's a big thing that you know that prologue skippers are not sensible, because if you're skipping the prologue, but you wouldn't skip chapter 1 in a book because it's just, don't need to know it. Like Red Rising, for example. The first chapter in Red Rising that establishes Darrow as this helldiver, establishes him as being skilled, as being reckless, is like a really, really important character introduction. And if you had been like, oh, I'm not going to read the first chapter because it's basically a prologue, like, the whole book is important, guys. And like the amount of character introductions that you get in prologues for books, that kind of, especially when you might get, say, like, oh, you're being introduced to X character and then they come back right at the end of the book. So Andrew Watson's book, Harbinger of Justice, has an absolutely fantastic prologue, which is very important for character introduction and concept and world building introduction for the rest of the book. So yeah, I mean, you can't skip these prologues. I can't say that every single point in this video, but really you shouldn't skip these prologues, So the next point is setup and foreshadowing. So foreshadowing, I think, is one of the most interesting things that you can do with a prologue. So we see a lot in the prologues for... I'm trying to think of a really good example for a prologue of foreshadowing. I think I might have to go back to the Wheel of Time again. And if you look at book 2, which is The Great Hunt, and the prologue for that is kind of this gathering of dark friends. And I think that tells you almost as much as book 1, where Rand and Mat are just constantly running into dark friends as they travel up the up country to Camelin. But then you find out that Mat's kind of drawing the dark friends in, and so you never really know how widespread it is. But then in the second book's prologue, you not only see that there are lots of dark friends from all different strata of society. We have lords, we have paupers, but then you also see that there are Aes Sedai there, and that's a really big piece of foreshadowing for that book, where mild spoilers, you find out that some of the Aes Sedai characters that you've met are secretly Black Arjar. They work for the Dark One. So you can't ignore that foreshadowing stuff, but also you have really important setup stuff. So not to use the same examples over and over again, but Stormlight Archive has a prelude even before the prologue, which talks about I can't remember what they're called now. The guys, the Radiance, maybe? No, I'm terrible with concept names, especially for books I read like 3 years ago at this point. But so the guys at the beginning that have the Oath Blades in Stormlight Archive, and you find out about them fighting this endless war in the Desolation. Really interesting story that makes absolutely no sense at the time, but as we go through the books, it becomes more and more and more and more important and relevant, and it's really interesting to see that stuff when you go back towards the end. So another thing you miss out on is context. So a lot of these things, so character introductions, setup, foreshadowing, world building, they all kind of amount to context. So I'm actually writing a book right now. Well, I'm planning a book series, which I'm hoping to start writing this year. So if you look at that, when I'm writing my book and I'm thinking about the prologues for each book, one of the biggest things that I'm giving in my prologue is that context for the world. So one of the thing that basically my book is set around a group of heroes who have saved the world, and then what happens when 30 years later the world kind of the kind of rising and simmering tensions from them kind of saving everything. So we're almost looking at like a World War One, World War Two situation where the end of World War One and the way that it ended and the way that they saved the world allows kind of this simmering sentiment to rise for World War Two. And that's kind of how I'm seeing this book series, is that this is kind of the world doesn't stay saved forever sort of concept. But the prologue that I've planned to write is set during this kind of golden age of heroes, the original final. It's almost like the last battle for a series of books you've never read. So that's what I'm kind of planning on doing for my prologue. And I think without that, you would miss a lot of character and world building context that would help you understand the rest of the book. Obviously, you don't want to just throw out concept after concept after concept, but I think that a really, really good prologue can fully help you understand the rest of the book, or the concept that you might want to raise in the rest of the book. So next one. So this is an interesting one, and this is one that I haven't really seen people highlighting, which is that a lot of writers will use a prologue as a way to do something that is a bit more unique and a bit more experimental. And oftentimes a prologue will almost be like a short story. So it will have its own kind of arc within that prologue. So if you're skipping the prologue, you might be skipping the most interesting, the most experimental, and the most kind of different writing that you'll see in the entire book series. So you definitely don't want to be skipping these prologues. I mean, we've said it before, but you don't want to do it. Number 6 is emotional impact. So I have read a book series, and I don't want to spoil which one it is, where a fairly major character, in terms of their impact on the world, dies in the opening, in the prologue, and basically the whole book revolves around the impact of that death. So if you miss that emotional impact, if you miss that death, the way that they die and how they give their life to save others, you lose a lot of the context later on in the book that the writer will often, the author doesn't need to re-explain how that person died. They can just show you how a person feels about it. But without that context, point number 4, you're going to miss a lot in terms of that emotional impact. I don't know. I don't know why you would skip a prologue anyway. But I feel like the emotional impact of some prologues is really, really understated. I think people need to pay more attention to the prologues in terms of how they kind of set up the pins for bowling, as it were, the bowling pins, for the rest of the story to knock them down. Finally, my last point is trust. So the thing that I've seen from a lot of prologue skippers on Twitter is that they assume that prologues don't contain anything essential, because if it was essential, it would be called chapter 1. And also I'm seeing people who are saying, oh, my time is valuable, let me spend it how I want. And I do agree that everyone should be able to spend their time how they want. But I'm going to try here to convince you, as if you're a prologue skipper. I would imagine most people watching this aren't, and they're just getting as angry as I was, or annoyed or confused. But if you skip your prologue, I don't know why, unless you're one of those people who reads on like volume of reads, on quantity of reads, not quality of reads. I do see a lot of people who are like, oh, I read an audiobook a day and I do it, I listen to it on 2 times speed and all that sort of stuff. And I feel like I guess, you know, there are people who listen on 2 times speed, and then like that's their, like, they can't listen to books slower. At that sort of speed, for me, it becomes like the Chipmunks. It's like blah 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 blah, you know. And I feel like if you're going for volume of books read, not quality and entertainment and enjoyment, and, you know, living in those worlds, really, you know, getting into the books, immersion, then maybe you are going to skip the prologues. And that might be, your motivation might be, I want to, you know, beat my 200 books Goodreads total, so I have to read these books as quickly as possible. Especially when they are long books, which tend to be, the long fantasy books are the ones with the prologues, like, you know, Stormlight Archive, Wheel of Time. All of those books are 800 pages, 1,000 pages. But if you're going to give somebody, right, you're going to give someone your attention, your time, and you're going to have faith in them to deliver an entertaining book, you should have faith in them. You should trust them to write a good prologue, and that prologue is worth your time to read. And that is honestly the most important thing of all of these, that encompasses all of it. For me, when I start reading a book, I'd always read the prologue anyway, but I would read that prologue because I trust that the author is using that prologue for a reason. They're talking to me for a reason. One of the things that I saw with the Hybrid Helix books is that the first Hybrid Helix books start with a like flash forward prologue, and then we go back, so we see kind of like a part of the climactic events of the book, and then we go back and we get that slow build back to that moment. And I love that kind of stuff. You see that in movies, see that in TV, but you rarely see it in books. Most often prologues are set, you know, 100 years ago this happened, or 3,000 years ago this happened, or whatever. But those prologues in those books, I really like the way that it kind of teases where we're going to get to, where we're going to go. And I really especially enjoyed it in Return of the Griffin, where they show you a character up front, and then throughout the book I'm like, oh wait, this means that means this character is this. And I was connecting all the dots for myself, you know? And if you didn't trust the author and didn't read that chapter, then you would lose so much of what I enjoyed about that book. So, yeah, I think we need to trust authors are going to write a good book. And obviously, not every book is for everyone. So, you know, DNF your books if you don't like them, things like that. But the big thing for me is, if you don't trust an author to write a book well from start to finish, then I wouldn't even pick up the book in the first place. And you're better off reading the prologue and then DNFing later if the book isn't for you. Don't skip the prologue and just go straight. It would be like starting a book and going like, oh, well, I guess I'll do chapter 3. Or like starting the Wheel of Time at book 5. It just doesn't make sense to me, you know? And I'm hoping that through my arguments, I have made it make sense for you if you're a prologue skipper. If you are a prologue skipper and you want to tell me why I'm wrong, pop down into the comments and leave a comment. Let me know why you skip prologues, why you think that they're dumb, why you think that the particular examples aren't good ideas. If you love prologues and you want to talk about any great prologues, you want to recommend some that I should read from books, then please do so in the comments as well. I'd love to hear from you, especially if you're an author as well. So if you're an author and you want to talk about your philosophy for writing a prologue, please do say so down below. And then finally, like this video, subscribe, and I will see you on the channel tomorrow. Wait, don't go yet. I'm doing a charity drive for BCHC, the Birmingham Community Healthcare Charity. They are a charity attached to the Birmingham's kind of National Health Service, and what they do is they raise money for small little things that can help support patients and the families of patients, things like books, toys, toiletries. Also, they do big projects, like they have funded the creation of a playground for children with prosthetic limbs. Now, if you would like to support this charity, you can go to the link in the description for this video and donate some money to my charity appeal. I'd be really grateful if you do so. This is an absolutely fantastic charity. While they aren't local to me, the charity drive is run by a friend of mine, Stace, and I don't know about you, but I'm going to be reading as many books as possible in March anyway, so might as well use that to raise some money for a good cause. Please donate to the link in the description below. Thanks so much for watching. See you soon.